Time to go. Hello, everybody. Hello. Jason Hine here. Welcome back. Welcome back to SimKit Podcast. And I am joined by a gentleman that I have a hard time describing Rob Orman for me. He's a role model. Certainly, that's true. Mentor in some ways. Friend. I don't know. Maybe I'm jumping the gun. But
I'm on board with
you're
it.
good with that? Excellent. Snuck it in there. But one of the most recognizable voices and faces, really, one of the most skilled educators in the space of emergency medicine and physician coaching. He's all the above. Of course, as I said, I'm joined today by the great Rob Orman. He's a man who, he doesn't really need an introduction, but what the heck, we have you here. Let's do it. He's the former editor-in-chief of MRAP, creator of the Stimulus and ER Cast podcast, host of Essentials in Emergency Medicine Conference, and now a physician coach bringing resiliency, longevity, and satisfaction back into doctors' lives. Rob, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Jay. I love that, man. Wow, for someone not needing an introduction, you just laid that. Thank you very much.
You don't need it, but it's so easy to do. Why not do it? You know?
I'll take that all day.
So it's a pleasure to have you here just in general. But specifically, we're going to be talking about brass tacks and burnout. And as I mentioned, you've done a very interesting, very amazing career transition or addition in your physician coaching space. So I thought you'd be a great person to ask about this. So I think it'd be important for our audience to know sort of the how, and then behind the how, everyone kind of wants to know the backstory, right? The why you made this career transition from the EM physician, the educator extraordinaire that we talked about in your intro, to now being a physician coach. Tell us a little bit about your journey to there, the how, and then the why, if you will.
If we're looking at this like an origin story, I'm thinking, okay, how in the context of how you just asked that question, so if we're doing the origin story, we're kind of foreshadowing in the beginning of the movie. The first 12 years of my career had a whole bunch of burnouts, and I really, really struggled with emergency medicine, which, that the career is just a lot. And there were things about it that I had difficulty navigating. I figured out how to navigate it for the second half of my career, but the first half, I struggled mightily, dread going into work, all of the things. Had a lot of emotional exhaustion. If we're looking at the different buckets of what burnout's like. Second half of my career, you're saying I got heavily into medical education, and eventually it became my full-time job. I was working for MRAP. I was working for another medical education company, doing essential emergency medicine, so many things. And the math on that can only go one way. Be working a bunch of full-time jobs. So I was working fewer and fewer clinical shifts. And the irony, Jay, is that I started getting skill decay in complex resuscitations. So here I was running MRAP and, doing essentials emergency medicine, all this stuff, which is the tip of the spear. Here I am educating the world of emergency medicine, all of these incredibly well-trained doctors, spending all my time in the education, and then in the ER, I'm kind of losing my edge here. It was ironic. But I realized I either needed to go back to full-time, and full-time in my mind was 10 plus shifts.
Okay.
That was, not because full-time means different things to different folks.
People, right?
Yeah. Or it's like, I could call it a day on emergency medicine. I mean, I've done it for 20 years. So I was 20 years in. Okay. I feel like I've had my fill. I've given this what I have to give. And do I say, hey, I'm going to do medical education as my job, transition into that career. And that's what I did. So I transitioned into medical education. I did not realize the trap I had set for myself, my friend, which was I was no longer working clinical shifts. And I found it very difficult to do tip of the spear medical education.
Sure.
I could still teach medical education. I think anyone who has been through a career in medicine can teach it. But what drove me the things that would come up that didn't really have an answer or I got stuck on and people get stuck on, I said, how do I untangle this and solve this puzzle? That's what really drove me. I didn't have that drive anymore.
Mhm.
And I didn't have the reference of those clinical shifts anymore. So I could see on the horizon that was not going to last. I was not going to be able to sustain this in an authentic way. You want to talk about imposter syndrome. I was becoming an imposter. And I think I was legitimately an imposter
Yeah.
because I I was not living the stuff that I was teaching. Now, you could argue that you could totally just continue to teach it. Yeah. But personally, I couldn't. So I had this moment. I said, well, what am I going to do next in my life? And that was the first time that question did not come back with an obvious answer. Because, as physicians, our entire
Yeah.
lives are
High school
mapped
on,
out.
right? The dominoes just kind of get in order.
I love that. The dominoes are in order. Yeah. The train's on the tracks. It's just station to station.
Yep.
And even with the medical education, Jay, I didn't have to worry about that because I was already dialed into it. It was a natural evolution. So I needed to figure out what to do next. What was my next career? And teaching has always been a core of what I wanted to do. I mean, I taught karate when I was a kid. Tried for many, many years. And I had considered being a high school science teacher at various points in my life. That was kind of a draw because it was just education. It was distilled education. And I love science. I still love science. We're men of science, brother. So I also knew that I was so connected to the tribe of physicians. Now they say, tribalism. I'm sorry. That's my tribe. That had become my tribe. And I'm also sorry to say, high school students, not my tribe. Not that I don't love them, because I had 2 high school students at the time when this was going on. So when I looked at what I wanted to do, this was many months of soul searching and journaling and exploration and various methods of exploring what this was. I said, this is down to 3 things, what I'm going to do next. I either am going to get a master's in counseling and be a therapist that works only with physicians.
Mm.
I am going to become a physician coach. Spoiler. I am going to get a master's in education and teach high school science. I don't want to teach science. You know what, Jay? I don't want to have to get up early and I only wanted to work with people who were invested in the process because I think most kids in high school weren't. So I thought, well, where did I really struggle? What's the work that I wanted? I didn't have anybody to help me. I had to lead myself in the dark. And so I ended up becoming a coach, and it is to help physicians flourish in medicine because it can be such a mystery of how to do that, especially in fields like emergency medicine, where there are almost infinite stressors and increasing loss of autonomy and a seeming increasing loss of agency in the career compared to decades ago. Foreshadowing earlier, that was something I struggled with. It's something I wanted to learn how to help physicians navigate. And I'll tell you, it's not like I naturally had that knowledge. When I started, I said, how do I learn how to do this? So it was a lot of educating myself, a lot of investing in coaching academies and in different types of educations and learning different models, and then coaching doctors thousands of hours over years to develop different methods to help people navigate these stressors. And they are definitely navigable.
Sure.
So it's definitely a purpose-driven evolution of a career. I still get to teach. I get to work with my tribe. And I also get to use tools about things that I was naturally gravitating towards learning myself. So that may have been a longer answer than you want, but that, my friend, is how I got from point A to point Z.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I can see the natural progression in that. Yeah, I actually feel like some of that almost mirrors the journey towards SimKit in like finding my procedural competency going down, trying to figure out answers for myself in the way that you're going through several rounds of burnout and had to drag yourself through learning how to dig out of burnout and how to get past it and maintain a career. And then the imposter syndrome stuff, man, that totally resonates. Once you're off the front line, if you're not in the resus bay, a few times a week, I feel like it's hard to say that you're ready to teach the next generation of resuscitationists. So thanks for informing us on that and super interesting to hear your backstory there.
To what you said, these two careers that we have, I mean, you're still in clinical medicine and you're doing SimKit. So this is something that, from my perspective, knowing you for many years and seeing you go through this process is such a natural fit because you were practicing procedures and mental visualization, playing heavy metal music well before you did this, thinking, how do I optimize doing this well under pressure?
Hmm.
And it's not, it's not like, I want to make a business. For years, you were teaching yourself
Hmm.
how to do this. And then, I'll start teaching other people. And wait a second, we actually need that thing to brace. Yeah, I got all your chest, your rib cages and your Craig models. And yeah, that's the missing piece
Hmm.
of all of it. So
We have interesting and parallel origin stories, I think, in our second realm of life within the emergency medicine sphere. But yeah, to your point, burnout brass tacks. So I want to talk about it. I don't want to trigger anyone in the audience because there's going to be stuff in here that makes me clench my fist or roll my eyes. But I want to get into the ins and outs of wellness, resiliency, burnout prevention, and then if we have time, close with, okay, we missed the mark there, burnout treatment. How's that sound to you, Rob?
I love it.
All right. So, as I was saying, I think there's a fair number of us physicians, clinicians in emergency medicine that when we think about how the hospital or the administration healthcare system in general approaches burnout prevention, it leads to palpitations, it leads to sarcastic remarks, it leads to eye rolls, right? It appears that many in the C-suite or in the admin space think having, a biannual retreat with 30 minutes of yoga, or if we throw pizza down in the ER a couple times a year, we've checked our box for burnout prevention and they're done. So, Rob, what should hospital administrations or ED directors be doing to help their employees prevent that burnout?
You didn't say a word in there, but you were speaking around the word, and I was wondering if it was going to come up that even I roll my eyes at. That even I is the word wellness. Wellness. It has become so. It's just so hackneyed
Hmm.
that it is. And I think because it does not have a tactical approach, you need to be tactical with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You know what else is awesome during a busy shift? Eating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chris, it's like, oh, these are just relief of pain or feed me. I'm hungry. It's actually appreciated.
Oh, yeah.
When it is presented as the answer, then that's when resentment comes up. And, yoga at a reset retreat, that's great because you do need to recharge your batteries. But I think what you're getting at is how do you do this in a sustainable way that actually addresses the root problems? And if you're talking about, I don't know if you mentioned this C-suite or the administrator, I can't remember who was the person that we were going to talk to. The absolute most important thing to do that doesn't happen is to talk to the
Mhm.
people who are in the emergency department or in the clinic or in the operating room and ask them, what are your primary stress points? What, what, when you think about your job, what do you wish would change about your job? It's as simple as that. I've coached some CMOs and presidents of medical staff, and they all come with the same question of, hey, I want to go in with a bang and do this and that. How do I do it awesome? You've got one job when you start that position. you need to interview the doctors that you work for. First off, that you work for those doctors.
Right.
And
Yeah.
people think that's number one. And two is ask them, what are we doing well? What should we double down on?
Hmm.
And what do we need to improve? And those questions before. And you get an earful in the best possible way to identify what are things that we can address. Doc might say, my biggest stressor is during busy days, I don't have time to eat. Oh, well, guess what? I'm going to get you pizza. Whenever the census reaches this point,
Yeah.
guess what? You've addressed a pain point. Usually it's not that. Usually it's something of, hey, I want to cut back on shifts and the structure does not allow me to do that. Or my shift distribution is in such a way that I cannot recover and the cumulative fatigue is adding up and I'm not going to last here. So you never know what you're going to get. And different hospitals have different cultures. And oftentimes it does require a culture change, but that's the biggest cultural shift is talk to each other.
Yeah. Interesting. And I mean, it sounds simple, but it's not, right? I mean, first, that introductory level, which direction is who's the worker, who's the employer, who's the employee, who's my boss, who are my people, coming back as an admin or even as your medical director for your department and recognize you work for your attendings, your PAs, your team, not the other way around. I think that's a really important mind shift for people in that space. And then responding to the simple questions of what goes well and what goes poorly in your clinical shifts. So simple but beautiful answer there. I think, as we dive into that, we talk about the things that people might offer as answers in there about what is going well, what are the challenges in your day, kind of breaking these down a little bit and sort of dissecting it further. So I think it's super interesting when we sort of talk about the prevention of burnout for the physician or clinician in stressful environments, and then the prevention of the stressors in that environment, right? They're different things. And some are controllable, some are not. We've had a recent podcast about, ED boarding and crowding. That's not going away. Hopefully it will someday, but it's not going to happen in a super timely fashion. So with that in mind, I kind of want to ask you what individuals can do in these situations. And if you'll allow it, I want to paint a picture to see what your recommendations are for the administrator, because we do have, I believe, some administrators listening, and certainly going to forward this to some administrators to think about and pontificate on. And then as well for the individual clinician. Does that sound all right?
Let's do it.
So here's the scenario. Buckle up, everybody. Let's set it in a wintry month. So it's January. You have a 50-bed emergency department, plus, the additional 22 hallway stretchers, a couple that are next to the bathroom, tucked under cabinets in a, broom closet that's now been converted.
You're really going deep.
Yeah.
Right.
They're all occupied, and they have been much or most of the month. As an emergency clinician, you're coming in on Monday, the busiest shift. There's 30 admit holds, 12 psychiatric patients that are waiting for placement. So you essentially, you're just shy. You've lost 90% of your department. It's unusable for the normal flow of patient care. You and your team, you're busting butts. The other providers in triage are doing what they do in waiting room medicine, all of that stuff that for many people is very familiar. As would be expected, despite all this, feeling like you're trying to swim through mud or constantly tread water or whatever you want to use for your analogy, patients are pissed. They're dissatisfied. They're downright rude to you and your nurses. Sound like a familiar picture?
Ravaggio, baby. Michelangelo.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So now, excluding and ignoring all the throughput issues that we're going to say are part of this ever-present problem, what could and should the C-suite or the CMO or the ED medical director be doing to support their staff on this Monday shift?
Let's address the C-suite because, some ED directors are peer administrators, which is
Wild.
not advisable.
Yeah.
But the problem with the C-suite, it's not inherent in C-suite, is that they are completely disconnected from the reality of what's happening. So in that situation, and this has happened, and I've I've watched this happen in real time at a particular hospital, and I think that this is the start. The C-suite needs to go down to the ED and see what it's like, and talk to staff and patients. Talk to the patients who are boarding. How's it going? Just to get the feel of what it's actually like. When they do that, it is often an awakening, let's say, of, wow, I didn't realize that's what it's like. The tumult, the din and the noise and the pressure. Does anything immediately get changed? No. Do they have an understanding of what might need to happen when you go into these meetings next? Like, then that is a start. Then the next thing relates to that and the first part that we talked about. So actually, to that previous one, there was a hospital, a doc I work with, they started CEO rounds where the CEO would come down to the ED during the workday and talk to folks and talk to staff. And really people felt like there was an esprit de corps, and we were on the same page and things were happening in program. Then the CEO eventually stopped doing that, and it all just kind of went back down. I want to tell you the tale of two hospitals. And this is a published study on this happening. So during COVID, I actually worked at both of these hospitals. And
Really?
it was, I mean, many years ago. And that was, which was just kind of a random thing and I know the cultures of both these hospitals. And the physicians in both of these hospitals are some of the best I've ever worked with. They are, it's just top notch. They ran a study where in one hospital, administrators would meet with the hospitalists, I believe it was, and meet with them once a week and say, what's going on? What do you need? And this is related to that first question. The people in the front line will often have a solution or see things differently. And the C-suite probably has a different point of view. It's like, well, here's the realities and here's why we can't staff all those nurses. But what do you need? And let's see what we can give you. And let's break this down and see what is low-hanging fruit that we can start to improve. What's stressing you? So there's all sorts of stuff that goes into those conversations. Who knows what's going to come up? So that was one hospital. Did that. The other hospital, which was a couple miles away, same hospital system. Did nothing. And years later, after COVID, the hospital that did the program where the docs were able to speak to the C-suite and say, here's what we need, here's what's going on, here's the reality of it. And, that is the C-suite working for the physicians.
Sure.
And I know what any good leader does is make sure that the people they lead are taken care of. The second hospital, still not much communication going on. Hospitalist thriving. Other hospital where there's no communication, hospitalists recently went on strike.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can, and it is a cultural divergence.
Yeah. Huge disparity. Huh. And that's, interesting in terms of just getting on the ground, being around it. It reminds me of the restaurant manager coming out. How's your meal? The music is too loud, or they're using inappropriate terms for your 5-year-old. Okay. They got to know the feel of the environment. Your answer in that space was talking a fair bit towards some of the systems problems. Like we said, not going to fix boarding, not going to fix crowding, not going to necessarily fix angry patients, although we might by getting them to rooms faster, all of those operational things that are important. I'm wondering if there's an answer specific to the well-being of the clinician that's not directly answering the stressor side. So what might a director offer their team in the space of, and again, these are terms that lead to eye rolls, but awareness of burnout, mindfulness about these elements, anything structurally that addresses the burnout separate from addressing the stressor or induction agent of the burnout, if that makes sense.
We could we could get into so much granular detail about things that directors can do, but I'm gonna just address this anecdotally
Sure.
from the docs that I work with, some of who are directors, some who have been. If there is one thing that directors can do, is to make every effort to make sure that the shift distribution is what the docs want.
Mm.
And if it's not, and it's like, well, you can't go to hire more. And those discussions can get really contentious in group meetings where docs say, well, we don't want to hire more docs. We want to make more money and all this. I will tell you, Jay, in the long run, having shift distribution, being able to work the number of shifts that you want is going to be one of the main contributors to career longevity or cutting a career short. There's so many other things that we may get to. Docs complain about the scheduler who doesn't seem to care or get it and keeps saying, oh, I'm put on a day shift right after a night shift, and that keeps happening. And then the director says, hey, stop bothering the scheduler. No, bother the scheduler. That is one of the most important people. And that job is often given to an administrator or someone offsite who's not a physician. There it is. Number one, make sure people are now, not everyone's going to be happy,
Right.
especially with that we can address the particular stressors of all, boarding and all that stuff. More than any other specialty, you're taking so much on. It's so incredibly stressful that you need to feel some agency and autonomy over what your schedule looks like. And you need to be able to recharge your batteries. Your health bar over top of your head as you're doing that shift is going down, and only time will help to recover.
Interesting perspective. That's a surprising answer for me in some ways, but it makes tons of sense. I mean, it's probably the most within our control, right? But we control our schedule and the amount of contact, and if it's circadian and the amount of breaks and all of the things that, come into play with where those stressors are and how much we receive of them, that's a really controllable one. So having that important element, influenced by the physicians and having ownership of the work that you do and the times that you do it seems like a pretty low-hanging opportunity. I like it. I think that is that's a huge take home for me from this podcast. I expected, and I actually value an answer of just validation, right? Being able to have your director earnestly hear you with your problems and come up with at least an idea of what we might do to address it is invaluable, has been invaluable for me. And I think back, I've got kids, and one of them's 2 right now. And I learned with my twins who are now older, when they're like, I want that toy. I'm like, you can't have that toy right now. I've had that 10-minute conversation, and then other times I've had the I want that toy. And I just look at them and I say, you really want that toy? And the conversation is, message received by daddy. Let's move on with our day. We have that internal desire, obviously, to be heard when we're in strife, when we have challenges. And so there's value in that as well. But I love the actionable element of control of schedule. So huge for me. Thank you.
I'm listening to you talking about Jason Hine Kenobi right there. Obi-Wan, love it.
My tricks. But now, so let's get into the individual provider a little bit. We talked a little bit kind of, C-suite or medical director. And I think there's going to be obviously a Venn diagram overlap here, trying to control our schedules. Don't schedule ourselves for too many shifts in a row. But I want to ask for you to inform us or what you teach in the space of mitigation of these stressors, trying to, that prophylaxis against burnout. If you can, maybe, or if you have the structure in mind, what you might do before that Monday shift where there's 50 people in a department, or there's 65 people in a department that's supposed to hold 50, what you do during, and what you might do after shift.
This is, right. We spend 6 months. We have the unburnable course, the burnout prevention course. And we spend 6 months going through all of the things you just talked
You
about.
got
And
about you
so,
got 75 seconds.
so I'm thinking, how do I fit it? I, I want to give you the master skill
Okay.
of this. And this is a master skill like you teach. When you look at that milieu of what you're working in, of boarding, no beds, and like all of this stuff that are the multitude of stressors in your day. What you really feel is just kind of the pressure head. It's like you're under this waterfall and all of the water is falling in your hands. Write down all of the things that are stressing you about that. Ease it out in your mind.
Hmm.
What is it? Is it that my desk is right next to the room where people are usually under restraints and people are yelling? I mean, it could be as granular as that. Just write it all down. And this is a micro recalibration. All of this stuff, kind of, this, I'm getting home late. I'm not finishing my documentation. When it gets overwhelmed, I spin my wheels, whatever.
Hmm.
All of the things, and just keep going. Pick one of them. This is a lot of the work that happens in one-on-one coaching, is trying to figure these things out. But pick one of these things. Hey, how can I begin to address this in an intentional way that builds momentum? So I'm easily overwhelmed. How can I begin to address it? So here is one thing. We're taking one thing. So, like you do a Crike model. We're doing this one halo procedure.
Yep.
Let me break it down into very small steps. What is my first step? How do I begin to address it? And what within that is actually solvable problems? Is this a gravity problem? Gravity is not something you're going to solve, friend. Gravity is just there. Is there something around that you can address? So what is something that where I have agency to act, and where do I need to have agency to accept? And so that's the first part, is finding your pain points. How do I start addressing them so that this job aligns more with how I want to experience my job?
I like it. I like again, and I actually really appreciated your example not being super specific. Like you probably have to peel some layers of the onion. And as you mentioned, it takes often weeks, months to do this. Like, I am easily overwhelmed is different than the telemetry thing's driving me nuts when it's right next to my computer. Like they're different problems, different like time courses for correction. But when you're taking it and breaking it down into the ideas, well, what is it in that space that's easily overwhelming? I don't do well when I have to switch tasks to, read an EKG. I find challenging parents difficult to manage. I find this one nurse relationship, every time they ask me something, I feel like it's incredibly burdensome. So the starting with the concept and breaking it down, I'm expanding on what you offered as an answer, but does it sound accurate?
I love this. Is some total yes and right here, man.
Nice.
I love, as you're saying all that, I'm thinking of an ED where I worked, where there was the dictation area, or power mic and Epic and all that, and it was kind of this on three sides. One, in close proximity, was the psych holding room. Then there was a patient room kind of backed up to it with a thin wall. And then triangulated with that was the telemetry monitors. So it was all three of those. And and that was just the beginning. So when you said thinking of the telemetry monitor.
Yeah.
That's a chord.
Those things, like that environment, you think of like when we're, I don't think in American, foreign soils, our interrogation processes of like pouring water and loud music and sleep deprivation and day-night reversal when that's the way that we found, we were inappropriately working with captured individuals. That's what we're exposing ourselves to in some capacity with like the overstimulation And yeah, if you're doing a day into a night and then you have alarming telemetry and you have a psych patient constantly screaming and you have the upset parent looking you in the eyes every time you sit down at your computer, obviously I'm not actually trying to compare those two entities, but it's, it's a unnatural, unhealthy, almost torturous environment that we put ourselves in. So to correct that is a pretty easy and beneficial thing to do. Yeah, I like the tangibles in that. And so I think that we dove a little bit into sort of the environment, environmental control. How is there anything you do for someone who's coming into that Monday shift, either in the drive-in, parking lot, day before, day of, that you recommend for us providers, knowing we're going to get hit hard?
So we have a lot of different roles in our lives, and those roles need different things. They need different energy, different almost personalities,
Hmm.
and some of it's going to cross over. And so the hardest switch is switching off from your physician or clinician role to being a civilian again, or being a parent or a husband or a partner or just a non-physician. But when you jump into it, like an athlete, before that shift begins, as you walk in the door, you have 100% control over how you show up. How do you want to show up? What is it you need? What is it that you are nervous to see? It could be a crashing neonate for
Hmm.
many, or 600-pound patient with angioedema, or whatever.
Sounds terrible. Yeah.
Sim kit. So one there's many ways to pregame. What is it you need in the pregame? Do you need to listen to pump up music? Do you need to tell yourself something? Do you need to listen to medical education to sharpen your mind?
Mm.
Do you need to visualize those halo moments, that septic neonate, that crashing neonate, that horrible airway,
Mhm.
to be ready so that when you walk in, you are in the mindset to immediately begin?
Yeah.
If you roll out of bed and you're a little late for your shift, it's much harder to show up ready to engage. So here's one: show up early to work.
Hmm.
Always, always. You're not getting money for that time, but if you show up early, you and I both know that when the clock actually strikes the top of the hour, boom, you're ready to go. If you show up right at the moment when your shift begins, you're playing catch up for the rest of your shift. Those 10 or 15 minutes make such a difference for the rest of your day. But the question is what is the mindset you need and what is the mindset you want to be able to enter that environment in an optimized way? Optimize what means to you. It doesn't have to be, aggro. It is, how do I want to show up?
I like it. That makes sense. And I think for me, the one that resonated is medical education. So I'll have, with some admin spacing and time, a few days longer sometimes if where I'm just like not in the clinical context and I'm driving into work and I'm like, I gotta pull it out. And so I'll pull up a podcast and it's not necessarily the education like I'm learning in the moment. It's just prepping your brain. And I could see how, like you said, different strokes, different folks. Like if you find you're over hyper stimulated coming into your shift and you're nervous about X, Y, or Z, one, prior to, in between, practice and prepare for that thing, how I talk to me, well, we can get you guys set up. But if you're
That's an awesome point
right
right there.
plugged, snuck it in. But if you're in generally hyper stimulated, I could see for me, it's that podcast, but in that 10, you get there 10 minutes early, you spend the first 5 doing a breathing meditation, you spend the next 5 settling into your space. And so think, consciously about you, your pitfalls, your challenges getting into work, and making your drive, your 10 minutes prior a tool that really preps you
Oh,
for
I like
the
that.
day.
The tool.
And then in the space of like, once you're in it, once you're in the thick of it, Rob, we talked about setting up your environment, making your workspace what you can for you, whether there be like, fogged glass so you don't see those things or anything, that's alarming at you right next to you that could possibly be moved to a different location.
Turn off the alarm. Yeah, but it's VTech.
in the middle of a meditation. Yeah. Well, I can look at telly, I can see it blink, but yeah, being able to at least pause them. I mean, in resuscitations, I'm constantly hitting the 2-minute alarm pause button because I'm always looking at the telemonitor. I don't need to hear it too, you know? So do you recommend or do people in the space of resiliency or mindfulness have recommendations? You know, there's prioritization of food, water, X, Y,
Yeah.
Z. You know, those, even finding those is hard. But if there's a 1 to 5 minute opportunity for someone that's in the context, they did their mindfulness in the parking lot, they came in early, they set up their work environment, anything someone can do in real time to deal with the stress if you're finding that the dial's going to 11.
I'm going to give you a little bit of inside baseball here. That okay. So I work almost exclusively with emergency physicians. Some critical care.
Okay.
Okay. So but almost all emergency docs.
Mhm.
And there's an exercise I do with some of them that when I suggest it, they're like, no possible way. They eventually do it.
Okay.
And it is to become a master at taking breaks.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and we will set this up like you're setting up for a Craig. All right. So I'll have them bring a little card or put it on a Post-it note, 2 check boxes, and the time when these breaks happen.
Ooh, nice. Okay.
And like, I want you to have that in front of your face at the time. And I want that empty box to be staring at you. And this is your priority for the shift. Look, you've done your education. You've done all of these things. You're doing the doctor thing. I'm not worried that your clinical knowledge and skills aren't going to be up to par on this shift. I mean, if that is an issue, we address it. A master at taking breaks. So first is have these things here. How are you going to remind yourself? And then we break down. Where is this break going to happen? What are you going to do during your break? What are you going to do with your phone during your break? Hopefully not use it. What are you going to eat? What are you going to drink? What do you need to pack? What do you need to shop for? What are you going to do if you are in a resus and that break time happens? And all of these things to get granular like you do with the other stuff. You know, what do you do with a chest tube if it's crossing the mediastinum? Well, you need to have a plan for that. But you get very specific with the actions that you take, not just, oh, I need to take more breaks.
Yep.
You become a master so that down to what is the water bottle you are taking in? Where are you going to fill it? I mean, all of the details. And it's like, well, you can't eat or drink at your workstation. Yes, you can. If you totally can. But I advise you not to. And I also advise you to turn your phone off during your shift, unless you need it for something, or only, have certain calls come in, take social media off of your phone. So that is only a tool and not a distraction. And you don't need to use your decision-making energy for that thing. Every time you get a text, well, there's a decision. Do I respond to that or not?
Yeah.
An email, social media, do I look or not? There's a little bit of, dopamine getting depleted. Doesn't it? You know what? Your shift will deplete your neurotransmitters enough. You don't need to have social media do it more. So there's one example of getting very specific and tactical about taking breaks. Not so much, hey, you need to eat and drink. How you do that on a shift, because we have this limiting belief that we don't have time to do it. I'll tell you, Jay, you absolutely do have time. You just need to make the time and protect the time like you protect the time for anything else.
Yep. That is so well said, Rob. I think it's informative for me. And as someone who thinks of myself as like a pretty high functioning, highly efficient individual, I definitely, and I'm imagining you run into people that come into the problem of not doing the same structure for these elements like you do for other parts of your life that require granularity, require time points, require execution. Right now, I have my planner, It's a weekly and it's got all the check boxes of the things that I got to do each day. And I'm breaking it down by like work, home life, exercise. But I wouldn't have thought to be like, the break is going to be at this time in the day, if possible. It's going to be this number of minutes. And I'm going to make sure that if I have the EMS phone, as an example for my work environment, if I need to go take that break, I'm going to need to hand that phone to my colleague for those 5 minutes.
Love it.
Because nothing more detrimental than like trying to set up the time to do something like that and having the work environment derail you. And so I've definitely fallen victim, I guess, to those things of like, I like wellness. I want to take more breaks. I need to drink more water on shifts. I've said that to myself too many times to count, but I've never gotten actionable about it. So super, super helpful.
I'm glad to hear it, Jim.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're doing those things, we're setting up the work environment. We're being conscious about identifying the things that are stressful, challenging for us, peeling back the layers of the onion to get them to actionable items in shift. That's a process of weeks, months, years, lifelong, really. How about in the space, you get out, hopefully you're out on time. If you're not getting paid to do your charts, maybe it's something that might, something that was important for us in our work environment, making sure that you're, being accounted for your time, getting out hopefully on time. Now you're either in the parking lot, you're at your house. What do you do to decompress, to stress mitigate, prophylax after the shift?
This is the harder one because you don't have complete control over how you're going to be feeling at the end of the day. Hopefully you have taken breaks, you have been keeping up in your documentation. How do you transition from work brain to home brain? How do you change roles? Because they are different mindsets, they're different energy levels. And usually at the end of that shift, it's almost like white noise in your brain. It's kind of on, it's like non-directed freneticness combined with being depleted. And talking to another human being is the last thing you want to do. Yet you're about to show up at your house. And there's a certain expectation there. There's many what you could call boundary rituals to help with that transition. And it's a matter of experimentation. We have this free resource, the driveway debrief. I've made it exactly for this. It is transitioning from work to home. And what I found is that there's a lot of unprocessed stuff. Yes, there's decision fatigue, but there's so many things that happen in that day that are still bouncing around like ping pong balls in your brain that kind of need to be slowed down and looked at. So and this is a little bit protracted and it's intentionally protracted. Here's how the driveway debrief works. Driveway, you get it. So you kind of probably get the idea. In your driveway, or if there are small kids who are going to be looking through the window, wondering why the heck you're not coming into the house, you've had time to just have a little bit of distance from work. I would advise against listening to medical education on the way home. Just listen to a funny podcast, listen to music or nothing. Silence is great. So here you are in the driveway and take a few breaths in a specific way, twice as long out as in. Parasympathetic breathing. In through the nose, out through the nose, or pursed lips. Breathe in for 3, breathe out for 6. You can have a little pause in between. As long as you're breathing out for longer than you're breathing in, you're good to go.
Out through the mouth, pursed lips?
Pursed lips or out through the nose. Doesn't matter. Slowly out. Then just do a little bit of mindfulness. Follow the breath. Pay attention to the breathing. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. Just to settle and bring your focus to what you're doing. Then, here's the key. Walk through your day in sequence. From when you walked in to certain events that really stuck with you things that were great, see if you can find 3 things
Mm.
that were great. So here you are actively seeking it out rather than it happening to you. So you're starting to get some control over it. What was great? What was really interesting? Let me walk through that day. What was something that didn't go exactly as I wanted it to? What would I do differently next time? Process that a little bit because otherwise it's going to be stuck in your craw. You might not even realize it. And then you release the day. There's a way to let it go. You're not going to completely let it go, but this is just to take the edge off, to take the tachometer down from the red line to a little bit less than red line so that you can show up in your new role as parent, partner, or even just by yourself so that you're not watching 17 hours of Netflix to try to come down after that.
Yeah.
So it is a reflective processing of the day.
Love it. I love it. I feel like, again, the idea of just being very purposeful in certain activities that you wouldn't naturally be so purposeful in. It's almost like, mm, forced gratitude might be the wrong term, but when people like having a hard time finding the things that that are valuable in their life, that you ask them to look in that space, like identify 3 things that either you're proud of as a physician or, compliments from a caretaker or a family member or a patient, finding those 3 positives and recognize, as you said, find the negatives, right? And then boxing it up and releasing it. But however you want to visualize that, I'd imagine you're probably doing it some sort of internal mental model in that space. And then you're through the door because we've probably all been there, that sort of, you get home, especially if it's an evening shift and you're like, I just need to forget for a little while. And 3 hours later is a lot longer than a little while. And you're like, damn it,
Yeah.
it's the middle of the night now. And it's really hard to let go. It's really hard to unwind. And so I think that exercise is great. And you said that you have a driveway, what is the term?
The driveway debrief. Yeah, it's
Perfect.
just it walks you through that whole process. So all
Yeah.
you have to do is just press play. I mean, it's on our website. We've got some freebies, and you just get the driveway debrief, and you just have it forever. It's on your podcatcher, and you just so it's basically a private podcast, and you have it, and you just press play, and off you go.
Well, fantastic. Well, definitely, as long as you give us permission, we'll link that in our
Link it
show
up.
notes for us all to use. I'm going to certainly give it a go. I'm going to give it a try. I'll give you my feedback.
I'd love to hear your feedback. Yeah.
All right. So I think we've actually, again, brass tacks. I love the fact that you're here. Love the fact that you're talking with me and you're answering the hard questions and not skirting them. Like, I feel like I've gotten a lot of great action items out of this conversation. I'm hoping that we can maybe wrap up with a little bit just global thoughts. How you think, if you were to imagine a super doc who is just fireproof, what are some traits or characteristics or practice patterns that you would say the burnout resilient, the fireproof emergency clinician has?
So we're going to make the Uber doc.
Yes, sure.
I would say some of these, if we're talking about emergency medicine, some of these will be inherent to that. Some of these will just be more global. So first, they are adaptive rather than maladaptive perfectionists. They try to perfect process rather than have their worth determined by outcome.
Mm.
They are efficient at documentation. They have that dialed in. So they're not staying hours and hours after every shift. They are a clear communicator with their team and consultants. When they call an admission, it is succinct. They lead with the need, bottom line up front, and it is to the point. Within communication, when conflict arises, they are grounded and they handle it well.
Mm.
They rarely get into conflict because they are preloading it, being beyond reproach with how they communicate. I think we're up to 3.
Yes.
They take care of themselves during a shift and after shift. So they're fed, they're hydrated, they go to the bathroom. When administration sends pizza, they eat the pizza. They have an approach to task saturation. It is not that these docs don't have the same number of tasks to do as anyone else. Some of them just naturally don't get as sympathetically activated or have maybe better executive functioning or processing for that situation, but they have an approach that here, I have so many tasks. Here's how I need to internally triage.
Okay.
And then they're able to sequence it because you think, I have 50 things to do all at once. I can't do all the, yeah, you're right. Can't do them all at once. Here's how I do them in order. And I would say as a bonus that their inner critic, that voice that probably drove all of us to exceed, the one that says in some way, you are not enough, it does not get free rein. Their inner voice, the narrative that they have playing, that might pop up, but they are able to recalibrate and move forward and not have that take over and sink them.
I love those. Those are all fantastic. They resonate with me. The task saturation and triage is huge in my mind for just as an individual. Because I find when my communication, the one that you mentioned but right before that, breaks down and I go, I just spoke to that tech in a more stern way than I would ever want to speak to a colleague.
Yeah.
Happens when I'm task saturated. I've overburdened myself with picking up the next and the next patient. I'm going to go do something. And then I have the task interruption, which is intrinsic in emergency medicine, right? So I love these. I love them. All right, Dr. Orman, thank you so much for joining us for the conversation today. I definitely have some links to put in the show notes for our people. I love the driveway debrief, all of the information you've given. If you're all right with it, I'm going to try to summarize it, put it into a little infographic so people could keep it in their phone and just bring it up maybe in that driveway, or sorry, in the parking lot before they start shift. Just think about, all right, here's my pre, here's my during, here's my post. These are the conversations I want to have with my admin team about what they can do for me in the space of burnout prevention and resilience. So thank you so much for all your wisdom, your sage advice, and we hope to have you on again soon.
Oh, thanks, Chase. Always great to chat with you.